Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Golf EQ Podcast. The Golf EQ Podcast is your weekly source to a behind-the-scenes look at golf EQ testing. This week, we are talking driver results. Do driver heads or shafts matter more, and how players can get better drives and save money doing it? So, Damon, everyone is wondering, what is the best driver for 2021?
Yeah, it's kind of an exciting time. We finally finished up months and months of driver testing. We ended up hitting 16 different models this year. So we obviously would have liked to have a few more drivers, but sometimes they're a little bit hard to get. Maybe a little bit anticlimactic. The Callaway Epic Speed was this year's overall winner. So Callaway for the last several years, basically since the original Epic, has produced incredibly fast drivers, and they've really found a way to make their models fit a large number of people. So they had three models this year: Epic Speed, Epic Max Low Spin, and then Epic Max that were kind of released to the general public. They've also got some triple diamond versions that are available on tour and in some custom shops, but we didn't actually test any of those. So the overall winner this year was the standard Callaway Epic Speed, but we found it to be very fast. It led the entire field. All the drivers tested in ball speed. And it was very close in total distance, but overall very stable, very good distance, very good accuracy for most of our people. And people really, really enjoyed the sound and the feel of all the Callaway drivers.
Nice. So out of those, all those tests from the drivers, what was, the more important factor? Was it the driver club or the shaft?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a little bit, it's something that people kind of get hung up on sometimes. So the golf club head, so whether that be a driver, a fairway wood, an iron, wedge, kind of whatever you're talking about, the head is going to dictate much more of what's happening at impact and what the golf ball is doing based on a player's delivery than the golf shaft is. So let's kind of break it apart. We'll talk club head first, then we'll kind of dive further into golf shaft and kind of what that's doing. So the club head is basically going to be the only thing that comes into contact with the golf ball. So that relationship, whether it be the face to path or the actual strike point of where that ball is contacting the club face, is going to dictate basically everything about how high the golf ball launches, how far it flies, how much it spins, does it curve left to right or right to left. All those things are dictated based on impact by the club head. Now, what the shaft does is actually delivers that club head. So if it's a well-fitting shaft, whether that be heavier, stiffer, lighter, softer, depending on the player, it's going to deliver that club head with more efficiency. So that may mean extra club head speed for a player that's very comfortable with a specific profile. It may mean the right dynamic loft. It might mean the correct part of the club face. So for example, if a shaft is categorized as high launch, low spin, that means that basically it's most often working in less lead deflection. So that's what players are going to be more used to. It's going to show potentially less dynamic loft, and it's going to deliver the middle to the upper part of the club head more than anything else. And that's where you get that separation between launch and spin. So golf shots coming from the top of the club face, generally, all things being equal, are going to launch a little bit higher, spin a little bit less than golf shots coming from the middle. And then golf shots coming from the bottom of the club face are going to launch a little bit lower, spin a little bit higher. So kind of to summarize, very, very succinctly, the club head dictates what happens to the golf ball at impact. And so it is the more important component, but the golf shaft delivers that club head. So the golf shaft, by virtue of delivering that club head in a specific way, does have influence over what is happening to the golf ball. It's just much, much less relative to like what the club head overall is doing. And then so to kind of piggyback that to how that applies to driver testing and everything we do, we fit everybody club head first, and then the shaft becomes a complement to that club head. So for example, depending on club head weight, the kind of actual geometric construction of the club head, you may be more inclined to one kind of golf shaft or the other. So for drivers, players typically have a weight and a flex that they're comfortable with, and they have a kick point that matches their delivery. So some players may need a high kick point or a low kick point depending on their speed and angle of attack. So we fit them into golf shafts that fit those profiles with each club head, so that we're always getting whatever the best performance possible for each club head would be.
So when they were getting these tests done, and like when they do get the results, what kind of information does the driver identifier provide for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we're collecting data, we collect everything. So ball speed, offline, total distance, carry distance, spin rates, launch angles, kind of you name it, we got it. As far as the kind of report that players can expect when they go to Golf EQ, take their driver identifier, what they're going to get is based on their swing and based on the shot shape that they want to hit. For example, if they want to hit a draw versus wanting to hit, a straight shot to a fade, those kind of things, they're going to get their top performing driver based on their EQ score for their specific delivery. They're going to get their second best performing driver. They're also going to get their top value driver, which returns to them how much performance they can get per dollar spent. So basically, some people really like the Cobra, for example. The Ping drivers fall in a really great value point because they're $50 to $100 less than some of the other premium models, but they're still delivering very premium performance. But as an added value, at Golf EQ, unlike anywhere else, you're also going to be able to find prior generation drivers because of all the data we have over the last few years of testing. We're going to be able to tell you, for example, if the Callaway Epic Speed is your best driver for this year, it's very possible, very likely that Callaway Epic Speed or TaylorMade Sim may also fit you really well from last year. So a lot of golfers are going to be able to come into our site, save a couple $100 by picking up last year's or the year before that, those models, and still get a really, really good fit.
So in terms of golf balls, I'm a victim to this myself. In a round you lose a ball and you're playing something else. Like, does the ball really play a factor? I mean, it does, but like, should you be playing the same ball? Why does that matter?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So in all of our tests, we standardize golf balls based on fit. So some players, they're basically within each price category, you basically get two large sectors of golf balls. One being kind of your higher launch, lower spin golf ball. One being kind of your lower launch, higher spin golf ball. So that the best way to kind of tease those out is usually the X version of a golf ball. So Pro V1X versus Pro V1, for example. Pro V1X is typically your higher launch, lower spin, whereas the Pro V1 standard is usually your lower launch, lower spin golf ball. And usually players fall largely into one of those two categories. So some players need that higher launch, lower spin throughout the bag. Some players need a little bit lower launch, lower spin, depending on, again, club path, angle of attack, club head speed, all a bunch of different parameters essentially. And what happens when golfers flip between those golf balls in a given round is it becomes very difficult to predict how those golf shots are going to respond to their given delivery. So if you, for example, hit a Pro V1 and the very next shot with the exact same club hit a Pro V1X, the results may be 3 or 4 or 5 yards as far as distance is concerned, and then you have a fluctuation of spin rate that becomes either more beneficial or less beneficial on a specific player basis. And the way that manifests on the course, sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes you can play a Pro V1 or a Pro V1X, and either one's going to be great for you. But sometimes what ends up happening, especially the better the player you are, it becomes much more difficult to dial in those distances. So for example, if you all of a sudden are hitting greens from 170 yards with your 6-iron with a Pro V1, and you have 170 yards to a pin, and say it's on the back of the green, and the next shot, instead of hitting your usual Pro V1, you hit a Pro V1X, and you end up 5 yards longer, that may be going off the back of the green. It might be putting you in a position where it's very difficult to get up and down. So for your broad amateur golfer, the best thing they can do is always play the same golf ball, even if they're not buying the most premium of golf balls. And the reality, especially in the last few years, is the direct-to-consumer golf ball market, the Encores, the Snells, the Cuts, Vice, even those kinds of golf balls are getting to the point where they're giving players so much performance at those particular price points. Most players would be better off going that route than buying some of the kind of cheaper alternatives in, let's say, the Titleist or the Callaway or the TaylorMade kind of catalog of lineups. I'm not, just to be very clear, I think that the Pro V1s, the TP5, TP5X, the Chrome Softs, the Chrome Soft X, Chrome Soft X LS, those kinds of golf balls are very, very good. And those will hold ranks with anything on the market. Bridgestone, I'll throw Bridgestone, the Tour B and Tour B XS are very good. But if players are going down to those lower price points, they're spending $30 a dozen, they're spending $40 a dozen, they're spending $20 a dozen. The direct to consumers are usually the better way to go, because you can play the same golf ball each and every time, and that leads to more consistent performance throughout the bag than switching.
Yeah, I've been going over to the Vices. It's good quality. I mean, it's good value. You buy them in bulk too. It's 18 a dozen. It's really good.
Yes. Yep.
So what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making when they go to buy a driver without being fit for it?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. So a couple things, even within a brand lineup, for example, like we used Callaway earlier, we mentioned their 3 models. TaylorMade had 3 models this year. Titleist has 4 models. Ping has 3 models. I mean, even if you are a very big fan of a brand because you've had great success with it before, there are different decisions that you can be making, even if you already have the club kind of picked out that you want, that can really help performance. The other thing that people miss is the hosel settings. So the hosel settings, whether that's affecting your loft or your lie or both in most cases, that has a massive influence on distance, on spin, on shot shape, which manifests both in terms of accuracy and score directly. So getting those things dialed in more so than just what driver you're going to play is critical. The difference in a 10.5 degree head and a 9 degree head in a single driver can be massive for some people. And depending on your swing, it can be the difference in 15 to 20 yards, even with the exact same club head. And so getting, I would say in order of importance, getting loft, matching your club head of choice, center of gravity, dials in launch and spin more than anything else. And then getting lie in the right spot helps you with your start line, and then also helps you with kind of the shot shape that you're ultimately going to hit, whether that be kind of a draw or a fade, whichever one you're trying to hit. That setting, depending on the hosel that you have, will really help get you kind of on the right path more often.
I guess we're talking drivers specifically. Is it bad to buy a used driver, or you think someone should go straight for a new one? Like, what could happen?
Yep. No. Just very simply, no. Buying a used driver is not bad at all. In fact, there's a large argument to be made that most players, unless money is no object, essentially, that you could always get equal performance with a used driver that you can get with the new driver, pending that you can get that old driver fit, which is kind of the most difficult part. So when you go in and see a custom club fitter, to my knowledge, none of them are stocking clubs that are not the newest year model of clubs. So, for example, it's very possible that if somebody fits well into the TaylorMade Sim 2, they may get just as good a fit into the TaylorMade M5 or M6 from a few years ago. But trying to find that club head and then get fit for that club head is very difficult. So that's something that our driver identifier is going to be able to do for people. So like I said, you're going to be able to, instead of spending $550 on the newest driver, you're probably going to be able to pick that thing up for somewhere in the $250 to $300 range and still get what would be very close, if not already, your best performance. The one thing to kind of watch out for is anytime you have a golf club with multi-material crowns, especially, so the TaylorMades, some of the Callaways, and then several others, you can begin to get a little bit of separation on the top. So especially where that crown kind of meets the club face, or it meets the very top. So just make sure that when you are buying used, you're finding them in good quality. You don't want to be buying drivers with cracks or something like that, because when the structure is altered, you're going to alter performance. And that holds true for drivers, fairway woods, hybrids, irons, etc. The only thing I would caution people against are 2 things. Do not buy used golf balls or refurbished golf balls. The refurbishing process for golf balls actually adds a layer to the outer layer of golf balls in most cases that has a drastic influence on aerodynamics. If that cover isn't perfectly symmetrical, you're going to get kind of golf balls that are biased towards one side or the other. So that's a really dangerous kind of way to go. And again, like I said, if you're going to spend $20 on refurbished Pro V1s, I'd rather people spend $20 on the direct-to-consumer new golf balls and know they're getting more consistent performance versus going that used route. And the other one that's very difficult is wedges. So a used wedge kind of loses value quickly because those grooves wear out faster than other clubs, and wedges need to be replaced more frequently than other clubs, especially sand wedges or lob wedges, 54 to 62 to 4 degrees, depending on what kind of player you are. In order to retain the amount of spin those clubs have when they're new. And usually with the wedges, people don't want to be losing spin. You kind of want to keep those spin rates as high as possible so that you can hit all kinds of shots. You can hold greens, you can hit into tuck pins. Even if you're high handicap average golfer, you need spin coming from the rough because you need to be able to hold the greens. Sometimes if you don't generate a lot of club head speed, you need extra spin because you're not putting a lot of spin on the golf ball to begin with. So yes, used golf clubs are amazing in every category, I would say, but wedges and used golf balls. Avoid used in those two categories. Everything else, as long as you know kind of what you want, or you can seek outside help for getting you kind of properly fit into those used options are a great way to go.
I'm going to tell my dad about the golf ball thing. He shops PJ store and he gets in the big bin and whatever it is, $1 a ball or whatever.
Yep. And if he's gonna buy used golf balls, just standard used are much better than the refurbished used.
Okay.
And that's strictly because of that coating, that refurbishing process. Depending on where it gets refurbished and kind of what that manufacturing process looks like, it's just very difficult to, essentially they're adding a new layer to the cover of the golf ball.
Yeah.
Change their aerodynamic properties, it changes energy transfer.
And like you said, it's all inconsistent because
correct.
This
correct.
ball
Very, very difficult to get that coating 100%.
This ball used a few hundred times. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. You don't know where that golf ball is coming from, right? It may have been laying in a creek for a week. It might be waterlogged. Right. There's just all kinds of unknowns when you go that route.
Yeah. So when it comes to the drivers, I think we touched on this last week, but is there really that much? Are they that much better this year than they have been in the past, or specifically to last year?
It's a really great question. Usually the answer is no. I mean, usually year over year, the driver performance does not progress that much. I think where they fall into a trap is they assume that the newest club from a singular brand is very similar to the prior model from that same brand. And I'll use an example kind of to illustrate what I'm saying. People assume because TaylorMade's newest line is called Sim 2, that the most similar club to the Sim 2 is the Sim 1. And sometimes that's right, but not always. And sometimes a brand will respond to what they made last year in the current year and kind of make a substantial change. And that change, depending on who you are, is either good or bad. For example, we have players who get much higher performance with last year's Sim than they do with this year's Sim 2, simply because on average, last year's Sim was a slightly lower spinning club head. So Sim from last year might be more similar to TSI 3 from this year than it is to the actual Sim 2. So making that connection is difficult and needs to be done with care. You can't just assume that just because they're the same brand that those drivers are highly similar, but it does happen. For example, the Callaway Maverick coming into the Epic Speed has been very similar in terms of their performance profile. And consequently, both those drivers are very, very good. So I would assume that most players could play either Maverick or Epic Speed with great success. So to answer the question directly, no. On a 1 year basis, driver technology does not usually move far enough such that it demands players upgrade every single year. Usually around that 3 to 5 year window is when players can find significant gains, or if they make a swing change. So if all of a sudden your delivery was one thing and now it's a new thing, you need to be refit. It may be possible to retrofit your old driver, just adjust, again, hosel settings or something to get you into a much better fit with your old stuff. But we on essentially every testing session, we have the difference in a golf club before fit and after fit, even within the same golf club. So let's just take the Ping G425 LST, for example. You pull that club off the shelf, you give that to a tester for their first round, of club fitting before we actually go into the testing session. And the difference of pre-fitting to post-fitting can be as much as 15 yards. And that's simply by adjusting what loft, what lie, and then kind of what golf shaft they're in.
Interesting. So, I mean, that kind of comes into play for those looking at buying used, right?
Mhm.
How, they need to really consider like how far back they're gonna they're gonna go and like price points and all that.
Yep.
Can you like get a more specific on like comparing the older drivers to the new ones? Like maybe we can go back, say you said 3 to 5 years, we'll go back 5 years. What is that difference between then and the 2021 drivers?
Yeah, so the biggest data set we have essentially goes back until about G400. So anything prior to like that year model, that G400, I think we have some of the TaylorMades from that year, some of the Callaways, some of the Titleist from that year. Anything prior to that, we haven't captured enough data to directly speak on. But essentially going back to them, you're kind of looking at somewhere between 3 to 5% as far as the overall performance upgrades. Now there's a massive upgrade usually in sound and feel, especially within that ping line. So the G400, people don't love the way that it looks on top. It's a little bit loud. Those turbulators, they kind of have an entire graphic on the crown people don't love. And the sound has really improved in my opinion, and most of our testers' opinions, year over year. So the G400 was good, the G410 was better, and the G425 is best. Now that doesn't always translate to performance, but as far as the comfort the golfers feel with those products, that's generally how it goes. But overall, even when you're talking about 3 to 5 years, it tends to be percentage points. It tends to be 5% and 10%, assuming that the golfer is well dialed in with their loft and their lie angle. Some of the things that I see people making the biggest mistake on when it comes to stuff like that is, let's say that a person played the G400 LST and they had the 8.5 degree head and they were in the small minus setting. So they were playing it somewhere around a little bit less than 8 degrees aloft, somewhere in that 7.8 to 7.9, maybe even as far down as 7.5 range. Coming into G425 LST, it may or may not be safe to assume that you're going to need the same loft. So you need to be, players need to be evaluating each head kind of on its own versus just matching new to old and assuming it's going to be the same, because quite often it's just simply not. They have subtle adjustments to center of gravity, which completely changes the launch and spin profiles, and it ends up being a different club, and that only manifests as better or worse depending on the specific advantages for a specific player.
So just in relation to Golf EQ, the technology and the data and everything that you provide, what can the EQ score tell an individual?
Yeah, so right now the driver identifier can tell a player what driver they should be using based on their swing and the shot shape that they want to hit. It will give them a top 3 for performance. It will give them a top 3 for value, which returns the best value per dollar spent. And it will also give them their top 3 prior generation clubs based on their swing. So essentially it gives them a very short list that they should be considering depending on what they prioritize most, whether that be absolute top performance or the best performance they can get at a certain budget, for example. And it will do that. And our identifier does pre-sort budget for you. So for example, if you can only spend $300 on a driver, you simply select that option and then you'll only be shown drivers that are $300. Now, most of the time, none of the new drivers are $300. So obviously that would be a prior generation driver, but because of the data we've collected for several years, we're able to do that with highly accurate results and then get people in a really good place.
So how can the Golf EQ provide personalized results for everybody?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we use a system of what are called machine learning algorithms, and that's kind of a scary word. People kind of get a little bit skeptical when you kind of use big data to then begin to influence kind of individualized choices. But basically, what it does is, depending on the answers to the questionnaire that you fill out when you come to our site, it essentially matches you with attributes of pieces of different testers that we have at Golf EQ. So for example, Pat, if you would come to our site and you would fill out that questionnaire, it is highly unlikely that you would be exactly like any of our testers. You would not have the exact same golf swing that any of them have. What you would have is you would have high similarities to different parts of each of those golf swings. And our system of algorithms can pull apart those golf swings because of all the data we are able to capture in our in-house tests and then match them to the different answers that you provide. So then what that reconstructs is an entire picture of the different pieces of our club testers that you are most similar to. And then how, based on the performance of the various golf clubs that we test, how that certain geometric and performance profile then matches the combination of those parts, if you will. So everybody is an individual, but everybody is an individual made up of pieces of a golf swing that we capture. We use large data to pattern match deliveries to club heads, and that is exactly how you get to your personalized results.
Cool. That's all your questions there, but I just had like one thought of, I understand you're bringing these people in and testing them on 3 different clubs and doing, a whole thing. What if like somebody can't come in, personally to be tested? What can they do on the website to kind of get themselves started?
Yeah, so the best thing to do if you absolutely cannot find a club fitter, you should go to the driver identifier. You should find your short list to try. It would be best if you could find a trial period. So I know that Global Golf has a really great U-Try program. So you can go on there, especially for new clubs. You can rent the clubs for $25, I believe. So it's $25 per driver, for example. You can do up to 2 drivers at a time. So for $50, you could get your top 2. You could get those top 2 delivered to your house. You can take those to your range, your course. You can play around with them, and you can kind of see based on the results from your driver identifier, which one of those 2 drivers you like the sound of, the feel of, because the reality is you'll probably get almost the exact same performance with your top 2. Whether that be your top 1 or your top 2, basically those drivers are going to perform the exact same for you. So that's the absolute best approach. There are other programs like that. I think there's another program called Dollar Driver Club, I believe, that allows people to kind of trial drivers on a less expensive process than having to go out and buy them new. The other thing you can do is, depending on where you live, you can find a local Golf Galaxy or a Dick's Sporting Goods, maybe go in and try a few swings. The used market gets very, very challenging because there really isn't an option to demo those clubs. But I'm always very happy to follow up with people individually. If they have specific questions, if they go and they take the driver identifier and, they get recommended, let's say the Epic Speed and the Ping G425 Max, and they want to know the differences between those 2, pros and cons of spending the extra $100 to get the Callaway versus, spending $100 less to get the Ping, what those differences might be. If they want to talk hosel settings, that's something that we want to incorporate down the line, is making recommendations for loft and line, but we don't have enough data to do that yet in an automated fashion. So we can do that manually with myself or somebody else at Golf EQ, but always very happy to kind of follow up individually because those demo processes just do not exist, at least to my knowledge, in the used market.